"Grandma, pretend you're sick and get out now." My granddaughter slid the note across the tablecloth without lifting her eyes from her plate. The words hit me colder than the wind outside the window. 31 years I had set a table like this one, and never once had I felt like a stranger at it. "What's wrong?" I whispered. "Please, just trust me," she said, and something in her voice was not a 16-year-old's voice at all. I folded the note into my palm, reached for my water glass instead of my fork, and waited 15 minutes before I made my move. My name is Margaret Ellison, and I am 71 years old, but that isn't where this story starts. It starts with a man named Robert, who I married when I was 22 and buried when I was 65, and with the son we raised together, Daniel, who I loved without condition for 44 years until the Thanksgiving I am about to tell you about. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I did not raise a cruel son. I raised a good boy who became, somewhere along the way, a tired and frightened man, and tired, frightened men can be led into rooms they never meant to enter. That distinction matters. Hold on to it, because by the end of this story, you will need it. Robert and I built our life the ordinary way. A small machine shop he ran out of a rented garage bay in 1978. 2 kids we couldn't quite afford at the time. A house on Delridge Avenue we paid off 11 years early because we never once financed a vacation. When Robert died of a heart attack in his 68th year, he left me with the shop's sale proceeds, a modest but well-managed stock portfolio he had built quietly over 3 decades, and the cabin on Lake Erie that his own father had built with his hands in 1962. Robert used to say that cabin was the only inheritance that mattered, because you couldn't spend it away. You could only be in it, or not be in it. I didn't understand what he meant until years later. I understand it completely now. Daniel is our only son. Our daughter, Carol, lives in Oregon and calls every Sunday without fail. She is not part of what happened at that Thanksgiving table, though she will matter again before the end. Daniel married Christine 19 years ago, and for most of those years I loved her the way you love a daughter you didn't give birth to but chose to accept anyway. I helped them with the down payment on their first house. $11,000 I never once mentioned again, because that is not how I was raised to give. When their roof needed replacing 4 years ago, I wrote a check for $6,200 without being asked twice. When Daniel's contracting business went through a brutal stretch after the recession, I quietly covered their mortgage for 8 months, $400 over what they usually paid, because I did not want them to lose that house. I never asked for $1 back, and I never once brought it up at a family dinner to make anyone feel small. That is not who I am. But I kept the receipts. I have always kept the receipts. A woman who lived through the years I lived through learns that dignity and documentation are not opposites. They are partners. My granddaughter, Zoe, is Daniel and Christine's only child, 16 years old, sharp as a blade and twice as quiet about it, the way the smartest children in a loud house often learn to be. She used to sit in Robert's workshop with him for hours before he passed, handing him tools she'd learned the names of before she could properly spell them. After he died, she started sitting with me instead, on Sunday afternoons, helping me sort through his old ledgers, not because anyone asked her to, but because she said the numbers made her feel close to him. I did not know that Thanksgiving, just how closely she had been paying attention to numbers of an entirely different kind. The pattern began small enough that I almost didn't notice it, the way water rises in a basement before you understand you have a flood. It started with questions, innocent-sounding questions asked at the wrong moments by the wrong people in the wrong tone. Christine's brother, Grant Wexler, had gone back to school 2 years ago and come out the other side calling himself a certified financial planner, a title he wore the way some men wear a new watch, displayed, mentioned, never quite explained. At Easter, Grant asked me, almost offhand, whether I had updated my estate documents since Robert passed. At my birthday in June, he asked whether I still had that lake property, or had I finally been smart and sold it. At a 4th of July barbecue, Christine mentioned, a little too casually, that a friend of hers had lost everything because her mother-in-law wasn't thinking clearly toward the end and signed the wrong papers with the wrong people. I remember laughing at the time. I am not laughing now. Then came the smaller things, the things that only add up when you lay them end to end afterward, the way I have laid them end to end for you. Daniel started calling more, but the calls felt scripted, circling always back toward the same 2 topics, my health and my plans. Christine began commenting, with a warmth that didn't quite reach her eyes, on how forgetful I'd seemed lately, though I hadn't missed so much as a dentist appointment in 6 years. Once, at dinner at their house, Christine gently corrected me on a story I told about Robert's shop. A story I had told 100 times without a single detail out of place, and looked meaningfully at Daniel when she did it, as though laying a small brick in a wall she was building around me one comment at a time. I began to feel, for the first time in my adult life, like a woman being quietly measured for a box. I didn't decide to act because of any single moment. I decided because of an accumulation, the way frost forms, not from one cold night, but from many. It was early November, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, when Zoe called me, not texted, called, which she almost never does, and asked if she could come over just to talk. Grandma, not about anything, just to talk. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table Robert built with his own hands from a fallen oak on the lake property, and she told me she'd overheard her parents in the garage, the door not quite shut, talking about the meeting on Thanksgiving and Uncle Grant handling the paperwork, and a phrase that made her stomach turn, she said. Her father saying, "She won't even understand what she's signing." Chris, that's the point. I sat very still when she told me that. I did not cry, and I did not gasp, because those were not the reactions this moment called for. I asked her, calmly, if she was certain of the words. She said she was. And in that quiet kitchen, at my own oak table, I made the decision that would carry me through everything that followed. I would not confront them. I would not accuse them. I would let them believe, for a little while longer, that I was exactly the woman they thought I was. Trusting, gentle, a little slow, easy to steer. And I would use every single day of that belief against them, carefully, legally, and completely. The first person I called was not a lawyer. It was Walter Briggs, 74 years old, Robert's oldest friend from the machine shop days, and, for the last 30 years, the closest thing I have had to an older brother. Walter had spent 40 years as an attorney specializing in estate and elder law before he retired, and more importantly, Walter had known me since I was 26 years old and had never once, in all that time, spoken to me as though I were fragile. I drove to his house on a gray Tuesday morning with Robert's old ledger books and a canvas bag on the passenger seat, and I laid the whole thing out for him at his kitchen table. The questions from Grant, the comments from Christine, the phrase Zoe had overheard, all of it. Walter listened without interrupting, the way he always has, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment before he said, "Margaret, has anyone asked you to sign anything yet?" I told him no. He nodded slowly. "Then we still have time to make sure they never get the chance to ask on their terms instead of yours." Walter explained to me, patiently and without a single condescending word, exactly what he suspected was happening. There is a scheme, more common than most people realize, where family members convince an aging relative, usually through a combination of manufactured urgency and staged concern about protecting her from outside scammers, to sign over power of attorney, or to retitle assets under circumstances designed to look, on paper, like her own free and informed choice. The tell, Walter said, is almost always the same. A trusted family member introducing an unfamiliar advisor at an emotionally loaded gathering, papers that need to be signed before the holidays for tax reasons, and a story about protecting mother from confusion that conveniently requires mother to sign away the very control she's being told she needs protecting from. "It's an old trick with a new haircut," Walter said. "And Margaret, I want you to hear me. The fact that they're doing this to you does not mean you were careless or foolish or too trusting. It means they were counting on the fact that you love them. That is not a flaw in you. That is a virtue they are trying to weaponize." The plan Walter and I built over those 3 weeks had 3 stages, each one quiet, each one legal, each one designed so that by the time anyone tried to move against me, there would be nothing left to move against. The first stage was documentation. Walter had me write down, in my own hand and dated, every financial gift I had given Daniel and Christine over the past 19 years. The $11,000 for the down payment, the $6,200 for the roof, the 8 months of mortgage payments, birthday checks, holiday checks, the $4,000 I'd given for Zoe's braces 2 years ago. It came to just over $41,000 across 19 years, none of it ever asked to be repaid, all of it now laid out in black ink on lined paper like a ledger of love that had apparently not been enough. The second stage was protection. Walter connected me with a colleague of his still in active practice, a sharp young attorney named Renata Ford, who specialized precisely in elder financial abuse cases, and together the three of us moved Robert's stock portfolio and the deed to the lake cabin into an irrevocable trust, one that named Zoe and Carol as the eventual beneficiaries with specific, ironclad language that made the trust immune to any power of attorney, any guardianship petition, any signature obtained under pressure or confusion, real or manufactured. It took 11 days to finalize. I signed the trust documents in Renata's office on a Tuesday morning with my full faculties in front of 2 independent witnesses and a notary, and I made certain Renata documented, in writing, her professional assessment that I was of entirely sound mind and under no duress whatsoever. That single sentence, Walter told me, would matter more than almost anything else if this ever went before a judge. The third stage was the recording. This is the part I want to be honest with you about, because I know some of you may feel uneasy about it, and I felt uneasy about it too. Renata advised me, and my state's law permitted it, that I record any meeting in which someone attempted to have me sign documents I had not initiated or reviewed with my own counsel. I did not go looking to entrap my son. I went looking to protect myself from becoming a woman whose voice, whose memory, and whose signature could be quietly overwritten by people who had decided in advance what version of me would be convenient. What I discovered in those 3 weeks, piece by piece, was worse and more specific than even Zoe's overheard sentence had suggested. Walter, through channels I won't detail here, confirmed that Grant Wexler was not, in fact, a certified financial planner at all. He held no license, no registration, nothing beyond a 2-month online course, and a business card he'd had printed himself. Daniel's contracting business, I learned from Christine's own sister at a hair salon of all places, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, was carrying nearly $90,000 in delinquent debt after losing 2 major contracts that spring. And through a conversation Zoe brought to me almost in tears one evening, she had found a printed document in the recycling bin in the garage, half shredded but still legible in places. I learned the specific target. It was not merely the lake cabin. It was a full, durable power of attorney, drafted with language broad enough to allow Daniel to liquidate Robert's investment portfolio for Margaret's care and comfort. Language so vague it could mean anything, or everything. I read that half-shredded page 3 times at my kitchen table, at the same oak table where Zoe had first told me what she'd overheard, and I felt something in me that I want to describe honestly, because I promised you honesty and not performance. I did not feel rage, not at first. I felt a grief so specific it had a shape, like a stone dropped into a lake I had thought was calm. My son. My only son, whom I had rocked through croup at 2 in the morning and taught to drive on the empty lot behind the old shop and walked down the aisle at his own wedding because his own father wasn't strong enough that year to stand for long. That same son had sat in a garage with his wife and drafted language to take control of everything his own father built with his hands. I let myself grieve that for exactly 1 evening. Then I closed the ledger and I went to work. My counter move, the thing that put me ahead of what was coming before it ever arrived, was simple in its structure, even though it took weeks to build. By the Monday before Thanksgiving, every asset that mattered, the trust holding Robert's portfolio, the deed to the lake cabin, retitled into the trust's name, was legally, permanently, and irrevocably beyond the reach of any power of attorney anyone could produce, no matter whose signature was on it. I kept a modest checking account and a small savings account in my own name, enough to live comfortably and give me something visible and reasonable looking to discuss if anyone asked about my finances at the table. Everything else was already gone from the board before the game even began. Renata prepared a folder, real paper, tabbed and organized the way Robert used to organize his shop invoices, containing the trust documents, my written ledger of 19 years of gifts, a notarized statement of my mental competency dated 8 days prior, and copies of the shredded power of attorney draft that Zoe had rescued from that recycling bin. I did not know yet exactly when I would use that folder. I only knew that when the moment came, I would not be caught without it. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and clear, and I drove the 40 minutes to Daniel and Christine's house with that folder locked in the trunk of my car, wrapped in a canvas tote so it looked, if anyone glanced in, like nothing more than a bag of extra rolls. I wore my blue cardigan, the one Christine always compliments because it makes me look, in her words, Sweet. I wanted to look exactly as sweet, exactly as unprepared as they needed me to look. The table was set beautifully, the way Christine always sets a table. And Grant Wexler was already there when I arrived, wearing a gray suit jacket at a family Thanksgiving, which told me everything I needed to confirm about how carefully this had been staged. Dinner proceeded almost normally for the first hour. We said grace. Daniel carved the turkey the way his father taught him, and for one unguarded moment, watching his hands move exactly the way Robert's used to move, I nearly forgot why I had a canvas bag locked in my trunk. Christine asked about my garden. Grant asked, with studied casualness, whether I'd given any more thought to simplifying things financially now that things can get complicated as we get a little older. I smiled and said I hadn't really thought about it much, dear, which was, of course, precisely the answer they wanted to hear. It was somewhere around the pumpkin pie that Zoe slid the note across the tablecloth. I have already told you what it said. What I haven't told you is what happened in the 15 minutes after I read it. I pressed my hand to my forehead and said I suddenly felt lightheaded, that I hadn't slept well the night before, that perhaps I'd overexerted myself in the kitchen that morning. Christine's face did something complicated when I said it, a flicker of frustration so fast I nearly missed it, gone before Daniel could have seen it at all. Maybe you should lie down for a minute, Mom, Daniel said, and there was real concern in his voice, which broke my heart more than any lie could have, because I believe, even now, that some part of him did not know exactly what he was participating in. I told them I thought it best if I simply went home and rested, that I was so sorry to leave before dessert was properly finished, and Daniel walked me to my car, apologizing for my having to drive while not feeling well, offering 3 times to drive me himself. I told him I was perfectly capable, kissed his cheek, and drove exactly 2 blocks before I pulled over, took a breath, and called Zoe's cell phone. She answered in a whisper from the upstairs bathroom. She told me that not 10 minutes after I left, Grant had opened a leather folder at the table and started talking about just a formality, some paperwork for Margaret's benefit, and that her mother had said, loudly enough for Zoe to hear from the hallway, "Well, it's a shame she got sick. We really needed her here for this part." Zoe told me she'd overheard her father say something that made her hands shake so badly she had to sit on the edge of the bathtub. "We'll just have her sign it next time. She trusts us. She'll sign whatever we put in front of her." I sat in my car on the side of Delridge Avenue, engine idling, and I did not cry. I want you to understand that. I did not cry, because I had already done my grieving 3 weeks earlier, at my kitchen table, over 1 torn page from a recycling bin. What I felt instead was a strange, cold clarity, the same clarity Robert used to describe when a machine finally revealed exactly what was wrong with it after hours of guessing. I did not confront them that day, or the next, or the week after. I let 3 weeks pass, the way a fisherman lets a line run before he sets the hook, because Walter had taught me that timing is not cowardice. It is strategy. I let Christine call me twice to check on my health, sweetly, solicitously, and I let her believe I was recovering slowly from whatever had struck me at that table. I let Daniel bring over a casserole one Sunday, and I let him sit at my kitchen table, Robert's table, and talk about how tired he'd been lately, how much pressure he was under with the business, how he sometimes felt like he was failing everyone he loved. I listened to him fully, because I did love him fully. Even then. And I said nothing about the folder in my trunk, now moved to the locked file drawer in my study, waiting. I called the family together 3 weeks later, the 2nd Sunday of December, under the simplest possible pretense. I told them I had something important to discuss about the holidays and wanted everyone present, including Zoe, including Carol on speakerphone from Oregon. I set the table myself that day, at my own house, on Robert's oak table, and I placed the canvas folder at my seat before anyone arrived. When they were all seated, Daniel, Christine, Grant, whom Christine had, tellingly, invited without my asking, and Zoe sitting closest to me, her hand resting lightly near mine under the table. I opened the folder, and I began to speak calmly, the way Walter had coached me to, the way I imagine Robert would have wanted me to. "I know about the power of attorney," I said, and I watched Christine's face go the color of the tablecloth. "I know it was drafted to give Daniel broad authority over the investment portfolio Robert spent 30 years building. I know Grant is not, in fact, a licensed financial planner. And I know that Daniel's business is carrying close to $90,000 in debt, which I am very sorry for. Daniel, Truly I am, because you should have come to me and told me the truth instead of asking Grant to help you take it. The room was entirely silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Daniel's face had gone white. Christine's had gone red. Grant reached for his water glass and did not drink from it. I slid the folder toward the center of the table. Everything Robert and I built is already protected in an irrevocable trust, I continued. It was finalized 19 days before Thanksgiving. There is nothing left to sign, nothing left to access, nothing left to take, because it was never something to be taken in the first place. It was something Robert wanted to leave for the people who would actually need it, for Zoe's education, and for Carol, should she ever need it, and for me, for however many years I have left to spend it foolishly and joyfully exactly as I please. Christine broke first, the way people who have prepared a performance rather than a truth often do. "You don't understand what it's like," she said, her voice climbing. "Watching you sit on all of that while we're drowning. Margaret, while your son is drowning. And you just garden and go to church like none of it matters." I let her finish completely before I answered, because Walter had taught me that too. Let the anger spend itself fully, because a person arguing against silence eventually hears only their own voice. "I gave you $41,000 over 19 years, Christine," I said quietly, and I slid my handwritten ledger across the table beside the folder. I never asked for a single dollar back. I never once mentioned it at a holiday table to make either of you feel small. What I asked for in return was honesty, and instead I got a stranger in a suit jacket at my son's Thanksgiving table, and a plan to have me sign away control of my own husband's life's work while you all quietly agreed I wouldn't even understand what I was signing. I looked at Daniel when I said that last part, and I watched something in him break, quietly, the way a fence post gives way after years, of slow rot rather than one sudden storm. Daniel did not defend himself the way Christine had. He put both hands over his face, and when he took them away, his eyes were wet, and he said, "Mom, I am so sorry. I don't even know how we got here. I told myself it was for your protection. I think some part of me needed to believe that, because the truth was too ugly to look at directly." I believed him, and I believe him still, because I know my son, and I know the specific way guilt sounds when it is genuine rather than performed for effect. Christine, by contrast, stood up from the table entirely, said this was a complete ambush, and that she refused to be treated like a criminal in her own mother-in-law's house, and left, taking Grant with her, without so much as a glance at Zoe on her way out the door. Daniel stayed. He stayed for 3 more hours that evening, at the oak table his father built, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, he talked to me not as a man managing his mother, but as a son who had lost his way and was, slowly and painfully, trying to find the path back. What came after was not simple, and I will not pretend it was, because these stories are too often told as though justice arrives and everyone is instantly and completely transformed. Christine and Daniel separated for 4 months, not entirely because of what happened at that table, but because it was, Daniel told me later, the moment he finally saw clearly how much of their marriage had been built on debts they were both afraid to name, honestly, to each other or to themselves. They are working on things now, slowly, with a counselor, and I do not know how that story ends, and it is not entirely my story to know. Grant Wexler no longer attends family gatherings, and I understand he has since had his unlicensed advisory business looked into by people with far more authority than I have, which is a story for someone else to tell. The trust remains exactly as Renata and Walter built it, untouchable, unshakable, waiting quietly for Zoe and for Carol, the way Robert always intended his life's work to wait for the people who would actually need it. Zoe still comes to my kitchen table on Sunday afternoons, and we still sort through her grandfather's old ledgers together, though now we talk more openly than we used to about what those numbers really meant, and about what courage looks like when you are 16 years old and terrified and you slide a note across a tablecloth anyway. I have told her, more than once, that she did not simply save me from signing a piece of paper that Thanksgiving. She reminded me, at an age when most of us have long forgotten it, that love without honesty is only a very convincing performance, and that a person's silence, however sweetly delivered, is never actually the same thing as their peace. If there is wisdom I want to leave you with tonight, it is this. The people who count on your trust the most are sometimes the very people who have quietly decided your trust is something to be managed rather than honored. That does not mean you should stop loving them. It means you should never stop keeping your own ledger, in your own hand, in your own name, of exactly what you have given and exactly what you are owed. Not because you intend to collect on it, but because a woman who knows the true weight of her own generosity can never be convinced that she is confused about it. And when the moment comes to protect yourself, do it quietly, do it legally, and do it completely, before anyone ever hands you a pen and tells you it's simply a formality. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? And from where in the world are you listening? I read every message, and you mean more to me than you know. For more stories like this one, like this video, and subscribe. There is so much more waiting for you. With love and respect. Until next time.